Yo, what's up guys, it's Talon, and today we're going to be giving you guys a meta report video where we basically talk over all of the top champions in Wild Rift, why they're meta, what counters them, all that type of stuff. So keep in mind, I'm not going to be going over the weak champions. I'm just going to talk about what's good, what counters what's good, some niche champions, these types of things, rather than going into everything. You guys did say on my last video you wanted the more in-depth one, so we're going to try to have, 20 to 30 minutes for this, about 5-6 minutes for every rule. Maybe we'll go over, I don't know, but I do think it's nice to talk about the meta, give you guys kind of a full overview, because we do have about 40 to 50 days left in the season, and so this is kind of the time where you should really start choosing your 2 to 3 champions and really grinding only those champions for the next 30 to 45 days and just trying to get to your peak rank now that we're getting into that part of the season. So I think this is going to be a really important video for you guys if you want to find those certain champions to really push through to the high ranks. So with that said, going right into the top champions of Wild Rift, in the top lane to start. So top lane, Darius and Renekton are going to be by far just the best. It's not even close. Darius is going to be really good into pretty much any front line especially, but he doesn't really have too many bad matchups right now. He's going to outscale most champions, and he's very versatile. He's very good in both team fights and side lane, which is kind of the name of the game right now in top lane. If you're good at both team fighting and side laning, and you're versatile and consistent, then you're going to be a great one trick. You're going to be a great consistent champion. And then we have Renekton, who Renekton compared to Darius is a way better laner. Renekton lane bullying is just absurd right now. The healing buff made his healing just not balanced at all. As soon as you hit level 5, you're immediately the best champion in the game. From level 5 to level 7, there's pretty much no champion that's going to be better than Renekton, and he's just really good at snowballing, and he can still shift into being more of a front line for your team later, even if he does end up not getting a big lead. And if he gets a big lead, then he can just solo carry a game. After that, we have Camille. So Camille generally is just going to be really good at surviving the early game and then outscaling everybody as a side laner. So because of the fact that her laning is so safe with her second ability, with her, shield passive, everything like that, she just has good sustain. It's really hard to actually fully kill her, even though she's not the strongest, in terms of pressure early on in the lane. And then she's just going to outscale everyone, like we said. Her true damage on her first ability is absurd, really good for melting tanks and bruisers like Darius or Renekton. So she's going to outscale all of those types of champions. And she's a much better team fighter than the average split pusher because of her ultimate being able to lock down carries. After that, we have Gnar, and what makes Gnar so good is just his lane phase, or not his lane phase, but his damage and his melting through tanks with that passive. So that passive, which is kind of like a Vayne passive, where you get the 3 autos, you get the percent health kind of damage or whatever, is just a lot of damage overall. He's able to run people down really, really effectively. The slow on his, I think it's his first ability, the projectile that he throws out, it's so easy to hit that because it's such a fast projectile, and then the slow makes it so easy for him to run you down. He has so much CC, so much damage in his range for him. Because he's a ranged top laner, his laning phase is going to be pretty solid if you space well. And then when you get into the later parts of the game, he has absurd CC, really tanky into his Mega Gnar form, and still a lot of damage into the tanks on his range form. So Gnar really, really solid as well right now. Then we have sort of a grouping of bruisers. I would say Mordekaiser, Sett, Aatrox, and Garen. All of these champions, they're kind of similar in that they're just really consistent, really solid. They don't really have many weaknesses. They're good in lane. They're good later on in the game. The issue with these champions is just that they're not Darius or Renekton. Darius and Renekton, they just do these same things better. But these champions, again, Mordekaiser, Sett, Garen, and Aatrox, they're all really solid. Mordekaiser specifically is going to be the AP option of that grouping. Garen is going to be the most consistent and easiest to perform on, especially because his second ability is such a forgiving ability, and his sustain that he has is really forgiving. Sett's going to be the best of all those into tanks, though a lot of those are really good into tanks. And then Aatrox is just going to do well when it's a lot of melee champions on the enemy team as a whole, because he can get a bunch of free healing. Then we have Fiora as a counter into a lot of tank champions as a side laner. If she has a good matchup into a top laner, into any tank or whatever, she's going to completely run the game if you get a good early lane phase. The problem is her team fighting is a lot weaker than pretty much every other top laner, so she really has to get that side lane advantage and push the side lane really well. But because she scales really well on the side lane, she's still a really solid champion. Then we have Jax, who's going to be kind of like Fiora, but he's going to be better into squishies and a little worse into tanks, but still fine into tanks. He also has more AP in his kit, which is nice. And he's a little bit of a better team fighter, but not nearly as good as a Camille, but he is a better team fighter than something like Fiora. So overall, pretty solid. Then we have Rumble. He's a really good AP option who's also a pretty strong laner. So that's obviously pretty nice. You know, he's pretty solid, pretty consistent, really good in team fights because of his ultimate, but his laning compared to the average AP champion is actually really solid. Then we have Gragas as kind of another AP bruiser option, which is obviously really solid. He's pretty much good in every scenario, which is what's nice. You can counter, or you can blind pick Gragas. You can build him AP, you can build him tank, just very versatile as a whole. Then we have Ornn. He's just the best tank right now. I mean, Ornn's kit is extremely broken. He's pretty much never bad. He can play into the bruisers and out team fight the bruisers. He can play into the split pushers, shut down the split pushers through itemization, and then he can out team fight them as well. So pretty much going to be better in team fights than all of them, and he still lanes pretty well for a tank champion. Warwick is going to be the best laner overall. If you want a lane bully, play Warwick. The only issue is that his scaling is kind of meh, but if you understand how to bully lane, then you're going to be ahead so much that you're going to scale fine because you'll just be ahead so much. Then we have a Malphite, who's a really good counter pick into AD champions because of his W. So anytime the enemy have a lot of AD, lock in the Malphite. Nasus, extremely underrated as a whole, really good side laning champion, but also scales really well into team fights. His lane phase is not nearly as bad as people make it out to be, so it's actually a lot harder to punish him than you might imagine, and he scales so insanely well. Olaf can counter pick into a bunch of melee champions or a bunch of CC, but generally not like super common. But if you see those angles, you can counterpick. A Mumu top, you can play a Mumu top if you know how to play him, because he can abuse his, you know, third ability to get level 2 really fast and kind of abuse that and just be a solid tank later on in the game. I also specifically from rank 1 of Mumu, his name's Shyster Nick. He streams on Twitch. Just Shyster Nick, SCHISTERNICK. I've seen him play it because I do it with him, whatever. Works really well when he plays it, so it's something to look out for. And then lastly, Gwen's a good tank counter, so if you see tanks, you can play that. But overall, I did want to go through the bottom of the list a little quicker, and then the top of the list, you know, talk a bit more about that so that we can get, you know, a reasonable amount of time for each role. So now let's go right into jungle. Okay, so moving on to jungle. And right now, jungle has 3 champions that can just carry so absurdly hard, and that's going to be Ekko, Nilah, and Zed. So Ekko's burst damage is just unreal, such an insane AP option, so broken. I've made so many videos on him, so if you really want to know how to play Ekko, you know, I'm like top 10 Ekko right now, 12k champ score, whatever, you can watch that. This champ is broken, absurdly broken. Nilah is just, you hit 3 items on Nilah, you win the game. If you have an enchanter, you definitely win the game. I mean, this champion's scaling is insane. The early game is weak, but if you're able to get through that early game, you can carry literally any game. I have seen Corrupt, who's rank 1 Nilah, or has been rank 1 Nilah. I've seen him carry the most absurd games down 10,000, 15,000 gold. It's insane. This champion's broken. Definitely extremely broken if you understand efficiency and how to farm and get to those 3 items. And then Zed is going to be a really broken jungler as well. And it's going to be his ult cooldown that really makes him so broken. He's again a champion where if you farm really well on Zed, you're completely chilling. You just have to understand, get gold on yourself. If you get gold and you outpace the enemy jungle, your ult cooldown in the late game is literally 20 seconds. You blow a stasis from the enemy carry 20 or 30 seconds for an objective. You one-shot the enemy carry. There's nothing they can do. He still does pretty good damage into tanks because of his pre-mitigation damage with his ultimate. So it's not like he's even bad into tanks. He's just good overall, pretty insane. So Ekko, Xylan, Zed, Nilah, you play any of those champions that you're probably going to carry if you understand how to farm well. After that, we have Amumu and Vi, who are pretty much equally as strong as those 3 champions that I mentioned, but they're sort of the tank slash, you know, engage options of the jungle right now. You lock in Vi, you can lock down any enemy carry, and is also going to be really good into all of those top champions. Ekko, Nilah, and Zed, they're all kind of going to struggle into a Vi because of her single target lockdown. And then Amumu similarly can itemize against all those champions really well. His clear speed is god tier. Like, it's absurd how fast he clears. He has really good engage, really good team fighting, really good ganking, just overall pretty insane. And he can build AP if you really feel like carrying. Shyvana is going to be a great, super mega selfish champion who's really tanky, scales really well, does a bunch of damage, pretty much does everything you want. But because her early game, you can't impact lanes the same way that Shyvana or that Vi or Amumu can, she's going to be, you know, a little bit below. But overall, a great selfish champion if you're just trying to be really selfish and solo carry on the jungle. Kayn right now, extremely underrated. I think Kayn's actually kind of nuts, especially Red Kayn. The healing's insane, really good skirmishing power, everything like that. So especially in the melee champions, look into locking Kayn. He's really solid. Mbessa, Really, really good right now. She fights really well in the early game. She's really good at skirmishing. You get one reset, you're an insane champion. Really easy to land the ultimate and lock people down with the suppression, so that's another thing. Just overall, Mbessa really, really solid. If you need a tank counter, lock in Lilia. Lilia is so good at countering tanks right now. I mean, it's insane. Like, she melts through tanks. She's not a champion I would blind pick or one trick, but she is a champion I would have in my arsenal if I ever want to blind or counter pick a tank. So just keep that in mind. Gragas and Warwick are both really nice AP options. Both of them, even if you build AD on Warwick, he does a lot of AP damage. And he's going to be especially good at kind of setting up and facilitating laners. So if you have a lot of late game laners and you want to get them to the early game, then Warwick is going to be nice for that. Or if you have a really aggressive team comp, he's really nice in that. And then Gragas is good in every scenario, similar to top lane. I mean, this champion is just super versatile, kind of the king of versatility. He can play 4 roles, he can do them well, he can build AP, build tank, all that type of stuff. Lee Sin's going to be really good for snowballing games, and just overall a really, really solid bruiser / assassin. And then we kind of have a grouping of bruiser / assassins that aren't as good as Lee Sin, but they're still solid. And for me, that's going to be Wukong, Xin, Jarvan, and Volibear are going to be more ganking / skirmishing of those bruisers. And then you're going to have Viego and Riven, who are going to be also good at skirmishing, but they're going to be a bit more carry / damage oriented compared to the other 4. So again, Wukong, Xin, Jarvan, and Volley are going to be really solid bruisers that especially are good at ganking and setting up team. And then Riven and Viego are going to be a bit more carry bruisers, but also quite solid. But again, still worse than Lee Sin and some of those other champions I mentioned. Then we have Talon and Kha'Zix. I don't think these champions are good right now. A lot of people like to play Talon Kha'Zix. They tell me they're good. I don't agree. However, these champions, if the enemy pick really, really squishy comps, are good in those situations. Then we have Hecarim, who's just a solid champion. I mean, I think Hecarim's pretty underrated. He's also really good into a lot of mages or immobile carries. So if the enemy lock in immobile carries, he can just jump on them, and there's really nothing that they can do about it. Maokai and Rammus are going to be some good tanks in different situations. Maokai is going to work out most situations. He's going to set up his team really well. Rammus going to counter pick into AD, right? If they pick a lot of AD, lock in the Rammus, and you can't die. So that's always cool. Not dying is really cool. Now, our jungle clear speed's pretty good, so all of the strengths I mentioned with top lane, you still have the damage, you have the tankiness, you have the CC, you have everything. And then you're also just, having a pretty good clear speed overall. So he's a pretty solid jungler. Morgana is going to be a tank / CC counter. If they lock in a lot of CC, they lock in a lot of tanks, you can lock in Morgana. Olaf is going to counter melee champions or a lot of CC as well. So those are going to be some counter pick angles. But again, overall, Echo, Nyla, and Zed going to be the carries that really, really define the meta in top lane, or in jungle rather. And then you have Amumu and Vi who kind of define the sort of tank meta in the jungle as well. So that's going to be it for the jungle. Now let's move on to the mid lane. Okay, so now we have the mid lane, and the mid lane meta, I just wrote in my notes where I was writing the champions, I wrote Syndra, Echo, holy shit. That's my description, because holy shit, these champions are broken. If you guys have been watching my stream lately, I've been abusing these champions. I'm on a 10-game win streak with Echo. I've been winning a bunch with Syndra as well. Been top 3 Syndra, top like 6 or 7 Echo. These champions are not okay at all. Syndra's burst damage is insane. She wins most lane matchups. She has insane poke. Her scaling is god tier. She does well into every type of champion for the most part, with a few counters, which we're going to mention later. And then Echo, his wave clear is insane, so he gets to outroam every champion. His early game is way too good for the fact that he's one of the best late game champions in all of Wild Rift. His burst damage is insane. His ultimate cooldown is like 0.2 seconds in the late game. Like, it's like 20 seconds, but his ultimate cooldown is insane in the late game. He has a get out of jail free card with his ultimate. Not a balanced champion. So if you want free wins, play Syndra or Echo. Trust me on that. And I have a bunch of videos on these champions. However, there is one champion that counters both of these champions and that you really, really can lock in whenever you want, if you see these champions, and that's Kassadin. If you see Kassadin, or if you see Echo, you see Syndra, whatever, you see any AP champion, lock in Kassadin. So Kassadin's really, really good counter into a lot of the meta, but it's not a blind pick. Whereas Echo, Syndra, you can blind pick. You don't want to blind pick Kassadin, which is why I would still say Kassadin's a little worse, but Kassadin does counter these top champions. After that, we have another counter to those champions, which is Yasuo. Yasuo's lane phase is so good into Echo and Syndra. So You can lock this in, and the nice thing is Yasuo also counters Kassadin. So Yasuo into all of the meta is also really, really good. And he's an AD option, which is nice if the your teammate locks in an AP jungle like Echo, or like Lilia, or Gragas, or Warwick. So you can play him with any AP jungle, and he's also going to counter a lot of these champions that we mentioned. So he's going to be really, really good as well. So honestly, right now, I'd say Syndra and Echo, definitely a top 2, but Kassadin and Yasuo are really close behind because of how well they do into those top 2 champions. Then Corki will be broken once the rework comes out. I promise you guys, Corki is going to be a god tier mid laner. The rework comes out on March 6th. So once that happens, Corki will be broken, 100%. Then we have Victor and Ori. They're kind of like a poor man's Syndra. They're still really, really good champions, but they're just not as good as Syndra. So yeah, I mean, you just lock them in if you don't have Syndra, or if you don't like Syndra. It's pretty much that simple. Then we have Galio, who also really likes a lot of the meta. He's really good into a lot of the meta champs. He's good into pretty much any AP, especially Echo and Kassadin. He's not as good into Syndra because Syndra can get farm free stacks, but he's still fine into Syndra and can outroam her and this type of thing. So he's just generally good into most AP champions. Zed then, for my notes on Zed, I just wrote Zed ult cooldown lol. We'll go into the next game here. We'll just skip over here. But I just wrote Zed ult cooldown lol because his ult cooldown is crazy broken, and he does struggle a little bit in the lane phase, to be honest. So generally, I would wait to pick him until you see a decent lane matchup, like one you know is kind of easy to get through. But if you find an easy lane matchup, it's going to be pretty straightforward to play Zed, and once you get to the late game, your ult cooldown is just going to be broken. Then we have Ziggs and Morgana. These champions are basically the AFK champions. You don't have to do anything in lane. You just sit and you farm, and then you scale up, and then once you get to a certain point, you're going to be really, really broken, but you're just not as strong as those other top mages that we kind of mentioned before. Then after that, we have Akali, who's going to be a pretty good assassin. If you don't play Syndra, or if you don't play, if you don't play Echo or Kassadin, Akali's probably going to be the next option in terms of assassins. Then we have a lot of AD champions, which I would say Jace, Akshan, and Lucian are going to be really good AD lane bullies. So when you see a champion like Kassadin, you see a Syndra, you see an Echo, and you want to just bully them in the early game and not let them play, especially if you have an AP jungle, lock in Lucian, lock in Akshan, lock in Jace, and you're going to have a good time. Yone is a nice AD mid as well. He's not really a lane bully, but he is, just a really solid AD champion right now. Lissandra, Vex, and Annie, they all kind of counter the same thing. That same thing is pretty much any type of assassin for the most part, and they're also really good roaming setup champions. So if you have perhaps a duo who you know is a good player and you just want to play to set up that duo that's your jungle, or you have the enemy locking in a bunch of assassins, these are going to be the champions you might want to lock into them. Ahri and Twisted Fate are kind of going to be more damage focused but supportive kind of setup champions. So Ahri, Charm, Twisted Fate, Gold Card, they're really good at setting up and CCing people in the team fights, and both these champions, they succeed really well when they're able to roam a lot. So if you're looking for a roaming champion, those are going to be really good ones as well. Then Brand, Zyra, and Asol, they all counter tanks. So if you see a lot of tanks on the enemy team, lock in Brand, Asol, or Zyra, you're going to be happy. Swain right now is one of the biggest winners of the recent patches. And he counters pretty much melee champs. So if you see a lot of melee on the enemy team, lock in Swain. I don't really recommend blind picking him because he struggles into certain champions. For example, Syndra just gets to poke him for free in lane, and it's really, really easy. But a lot of other champions, especially a lot of melee champions, you're going to have a really good time as Swain right now. Zoe and Heimerdinger, in my opinion, are extremely underrated, so I just wanted to mention them as well. I think Zoe, extremely broken champion, but nobody ever plays her for whatever reason. And Heimerdinger, he gets prio in pretty much every lane, despite scaling pretty well. So that's pretty much it for the mid lane. Again, Syndra, Echo, holy shit. That's all you really need to know. Let's get into ADC now. All right, so now we got ADC, and honestly, the ADC meta, it's not changed that much from what it previously was. Right now, Kai'Sa and Varus, they're still OP. They've been OP for so long. The reason that Varus is OP is because he's one of the best laning champions in the game, and he's still really good at melting all of the squishies, and he has build versatility, so you can still melt tanks with your W passive. So he pretty much just does well into everything and lanes way better than most ADCs, and he works with like every single support in the game, basically. Then we have Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa's broken because she can build every item in the game. I literally had to tank Kai'Sa on my team. This person went Terminus, Runons, and then the enemy were full AD, so they went Thornmail, and then I think they went Twin Guard, and they were only building 2 damage items, and they solo carried the game and did like 35% damage. I mean, this champion gets to build everything, completely counters tanks because of just her passive, the fact that she does multiple forms of damage. Completely broken champion. Works so well with the supports too, especially any enchanter that buffs her really well, like, you know, Lulu, Emilio, Yumi. If you have one of those, Kai'Sa can't lose, and yet Kai'Sa still follows up well if you have a tank support. Then Sivir is also kind of insane right now. Really, really good hyper carry, really consistent. It's easy to get through the lane phase because of your wave clear and because of your spell shield. And then if you get to 3 items on Sivir, you're going to melt everyone. Very, very insane. Again, after that, Corki is going to be OP. We'll have to wait till the rework comes, but I promise you, Corki will be OP. March 6th, mark your calendars. Champion will be broken. Then we have Xayah. Never really a bad situation to pick Xayah in. She's very like self-sufficient because of the peel that she has from her ultimate. So if you feel like you just don't like relying on your team to peel for you, then you have that champion, and that's going to work out well for you, so you can play the Xayah. Then Zeri is just really nice into the meta. I feel like there's a lot of shielding right now in the meta. There's a lot of tanky champions, and she really excels when she can just free hit the tank, stack up her lethal tempo, steal those shields from the enemy, all those types of things. Feels like she can do that really well right now, and she works with a lot of the enchanters that are really meta, which is also really, really good, of course. After that, we have Caitlyn, who's just a good lane bully, as always, right? You see a low-range hyper carry picked in, like Kai'Sa, like Sivir, whatever, you're gonna, or well, it's not that low, but, you know, you lock in, you know, the Caitlyn into these champions, and it's going to be good. Like, you're going to lane bully. If you play properly in lane, you're going to kind of shut them down. You're going to make it hard for them to play the game. The issue is her scaling in the mid game is not good. Mid game, 2-3 item, Caitlyn is just like not scary. She kind of shoots a pea shooter if you don't get a lead, and she's just not nearly as consistent. But then she does have a high power spike on 4 or 5 items. So it's kind of the weird thing about her is like you're strong in the early game, really, really strong. Then you're kind of weak in the mid game, and then you're really strong in the late game again. So it's a weird kind of power curve. But she is overall a solid lane bully. After that, we have Lucian, who's kind of the short-range lane bully. So if you have a lot of, let's say, engage is going to make it easy for you, or you know it's going to be pretty easy to get in close to the enemy team and get all your damage off, he's going to be really good. But he's going to struggle into high-range champions like Caitlyn, like Varus, like Ashe. These champions are going to make it hard for him to play. Then we have Tristana. Tristana is kind of like just like a worse version of a lot of these other hyper carries like Zeri or Kai'Sa or whatever. But if you're good on Tristana, I mean, she's one of my favorite champions. You can still make her work. You can still carry on her. You can basically pick her when you would pick Kai'Sa, when you would pick Sivir or whatever. But you're going to feel a bit worse compared to playing those champions, I guess. Then after that, we have Ashe. Ashe is just a lane bully. If you want to be a supportive champion but have really good lane phase, lock in Ashe. Not really strong, but if that's your playstyle, then it works out. Ezreal, kind of bad right now, frankly. Like, he just doesn't have the damage output to deal with the meta. It just doesn't feel like he's really that great. If you're really, really good on him, you can play him. But you have to be pretty insane on him to make him actually feel strong right now. After that, we have Miss Fortune, who's just a god-tier champion. If you have Engage, if you have a Leona, you have a Nautilus, you have an Alistar who can set up your ultimate really easily and lock people down, you can lock this champion in, and you're going to have good lane phase, and you're going to scale well because of the Engage. But she struggles so much with enchanters, you just don't want to lock her in when you have an enchanter. And she does get outscaled by most champions. Then Jhin, kind of just kind of like better or worse version of Miss Fortune, where you just lock it in with like tanks generally. But he's just not very good right now. I really don't recommend that you play him. But, you know, if you think like it's a fun champion or you like the play style, whatever, you could play him. I just don't think he's very good. And then the rest are kind of not good, but playable. Like, if you have a question about the ADC, the other ADCs I didn't mention, ask me in the comments. But basically, I don't think any of the other ADCs are really worth mentioning. But you know, they do have their situations where they're fine. So yeah, that's it for ADC. Now let's go into support. Okay, and lastly, we have support. So with support, there's really a distinction that I always have to make when I make one of these types of videos, and that is solo queue versus duo or trio or whatever. And again, the meta is going to be pretty similar in support and ADC compared to previous metas. A lot of the stuff that changes in the other roles. But here, again, if you're a solo queue player, the best champions for you are going to be frontline. They're going to be engaged champions. They're going to be Nautilus, 100% going to be the best solo queue support right now. You're going to have other champions, other engage like Thresh, really, really good as well. And then some other tanks that work well are Ornn, Leona, and Alistar. And then if you want to lock in other good solo queue tanks, Blitzcrank is going to be good into pick comps or with a pick comp or a reset comp. So a reset comp is going to stuff like Jinx, Aatrox, Viego, where you have a champion who has resets, and your goal is just to get them one kill to sort of, you know, snowball the fight from there overall. And then you also have some other solo queue champions you could play, like Galio to counter AP. He's going to be a good engage if the enemy have a lot of AP. Swain is actually pretty solid right now. Normally I'm kind of a Swain hater, but in this meta, if the enemy have some melee champions, you can lock in the Swain and you're going to be pretty happy about it right now. Definitely. Jarvan's going to counter low mobility champs, so if they have like no mobility, you could lock in the Jarvan as a support, but I don't recommend it generally. But again, it's not bad for kind of carrying solo queue. So those are going to be a lot of the main kind of carry supports. I would say the last one would be Pyke as well, I would mention, as another engaged kind of carry support, but he's a bit obviously more of like a solo carry assassin, whereas the other ones I mentioned are more like tank engage and you carry through engage. So if you really like Pyke, that's a solid one for solo queue, but you kind of got to be really, really good on him, sort of be like a Pyke one trick to really make him work, because he's a little harder to play. And then to go on some of the range champions that are good for solo queue. So the best enchanters for solo queue are going to be Nami and Janna because they have some playmaking potential and they have a lot more agency than the average enchanter. Then we have some mages like Karma, Lux, and Zyra. So Karma is going to be really good with a poke ADC. So if you have an Ezreal, you have a Varus, lock in the Karma and you're going to dominate that lane, and then you're going to have the damage output to carry later on in the game. If you want to lock in a Lux, you can do that with a lot of poke lane bullies as well, but especially works well with champions who have CC to follow up. So if you have a Varus, you have a Caitlyn, you lock in one of these champions and you're going to be able to carry a lot of games as well. And then Zyra is going to counter tank. So if you see a bunch of tanks, you lock in Zyra or Morgana as sort of that tank counter pick in the support role as well. So that's generally going to be the solo queue sort of meta. And then let's shift into the duo queue meta, which is pretty boring. The duo queue meta is lock an enchanter and hope that your ADC is better than enemy ADC. So I only recommend doing this if you have a friend who you think is really, really good at ADC or at jungle or whatever. So basically to go into the meta, you lock in Lulu with a hyper carry. Whenever you do it with a hyper carry, anything very auto attack based, Lulu is broken. In my opinion, Lulu is legitimately the best champion in the game in like an organized setting. Emilio, very similar to Lulu, works a little better with champs who can abuse the range advantage. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. And then we have other enchanters like Yuumi, Soraka, these types of champions, pretty much any Sona, you know, any kind of enchanter that you can think of are just going to sort of be worse versions of you know, the Emilio or the Lulu. And then you can lock in those other tanks I mentioned in duo queue still, and it's still going to work well. The issue is just going to be you might like struggle if you play into a duo with a hyper carry, because a lot of times those hyper carries, they end up melting you in the late game. So you kind of got to be pretty good at laning, understand pretty well. But you can lock in these tanks, especially when you're duo with someone playing an aggressive ADC. Maybe a Varus, you know, a Lucian, a Draven. Those are going to be when you're going to want to lock those in. And then when you have sort of a hyper carry duo, you're going to want to lock in, you know, the enchanter or something along those lines. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the meta as a whole. I hope this is useful to you guys. You guys have about 40 to 50 days to reach whatever rank it is that you want to reach. And so I hope that you guys choose 2 or 3 of these champions that you feel fit your playstyle, that you think are strong in the meta. You lock those in and you can hopefully reach your peak rank. If you have questions about the meta, maybe I didn't mention your favorite champion or whatever, just ask in the comments. I'll give you my opinion on the champion. But if I didn't mention it, I probably think it's not super strong consistently, but it probably still has its counterpick scenarios where it is strong. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, I do coaching for $15 an hour as a rank 5 sovereign autofill player. Just DM me on Discord, Talon1169, or through the link in the description to my YouTube or to my Discord server to DM me there. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.